All right. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Attorney Lounge. Today we've got Steve Henry. Steve is the founder and executive director, and I believe also the general counsel of Litigation, Counsel of America. Do I have that correct, Steve?
Correct. My wife and I co-founded it.
Yeah, and so I want to get into that. It's a great organization. I've become familiar with it over the last year and attended a couple of events, and so I've gotten to know Steve a little bit, and I'm excited to kind of dig into your background and where it all began. I've been starting these podcasts with a little bit of a curveball question, so I'm going to ask you this: do you know where anyone could buy a tuxedo in Banff, Canada?
Well, I don't know about Banff, but you may have to go to Calgary for one. Is that what you had to do?
I was at the Banff LCA event a few months ago. Unbeknownst to me, there's a black tie event at the LCA program, and so I, in the middle of the day, decided to go find myself a tuxedo. I scoured through the flea markets in Banff,
I forgot you. Yeah, you need to get some kind of trophy for that. Putting together a tuxedo from
I agree.
complete.
I agree. I ended up navigating through about 3 different flea market or secondhand stores in Banff, and I found like a jacket in one, I found a cummerbund and a tie at another, and I think some pants at another, and I think I pulled it off. So
That is so great. That is so great.
if
That was
anybody
fun.
ever needs any help finding a tuxedo in Banff, I'm your guy. So
I think I'll bring that up at the next conference.
yeah,
That,
I hope so. I hope so. I was kind of proud of myself. So, but it was a wonderful event, amazing group of people. That setting in Banff was unbelievable too.
yeah, it really was.
Yeah,
It
big
really
time.
was. We took a construction group there several years ago and just had to take the LCA back there because it was so nice.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, gorgeous setting. If you've never been there, highly recommend it. Okay, so really starting off the show, I thought, Steve, um, we could get an idea kind of, where you grew up, where you went to school, how you became interested in law in the first place. Like, tell us a little bit about your backstory.
I was born in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, about 3 or 4 blocks from the University of Alabama campus, and grew up about 10 miles outside of town in a suburb of Northport, Alabama, kind of out in the country, basically. Um, it was a farm atmosphere because my grandmother, who lived nearby, raised cows and chickens and everything else. So I grew up helping, I guess you would say, put food on the table with cows and chickens and pigs and whatever, goats. And that was a very interesting upbringing. My father, at some point, he was a worker at a local chemical plant, and at some point he said, "I'm over anything to do with farm life. We can buy what we need at the grocery store." So he got rid of our livestock, and from there on out, we lived a much more normal life from the standpoint of most people in the country. So anyway, it was a very nice childhood. I have an older brother and an older sister, and they're each several years older than me. So after they grew up, I was still around 6th or 7th grade. So it was almost like being an only child at that point. So it was a very nice, loving family. And my dad just passed away a few years ago. He lived to be 92. My mom lived to be right at 91. She passed away a couple of years ago. So hopefully the genes run in the family.
Yeah. You're going strong. I hope so too. It's interesting. So kind of a blue collar background. I mean, I'm somewhat similar. I grew up in Kansas, and I didn't grow up on a farm. Didn't have to forage for food in the barn or anything, but similar thing. I didn't have a family sort of history of going to college, going to law school. So, at what point did law school kind of creep into your mind as something that you might want to do?
Oh goodness, law school would have been a fantasy of mine growing up. I grew up in the first generation with television. I'm a boomer, so I grew
Hmm.
up in the first generation with televisions, and Perry Mason was, he was king of the hill,
Hmm.
and the idea of becoming a lawyer was far fetched to me because we didn't even know any lawyers outside of
Hmm.
my brother having a car crash when he was in high school, and the insurance company hiring someone to defend him. We never had any contact with lawyers. There certainly weren't any lawyers that went to our small church or anything of that nature. The funny thing about it, I ended up going to work for the same and working with the same lawyer that whose firm represented my brother
Oh,
20
wow.
years prior. Later on, after I'd moved back to my hometown from Texas,
Hmm. Yeah,
so
that is interesting.
but
That's the same. Like I would never have. I don't think I knew any lawyers growing up. It would have been
mhm.
an interest, I mean, I guess so I maybe had some friends whose parents were in law, but like I didn't really understand it. It wasn't something that I sort of thought about or gravitated towards. But my interest in the law initially came from, reading the book, The Firm, John
Oh,
Grisham.
really? How about that?
And so, and I think, you know, similarly, I read To Kill a Mockingbird. And so it was more like the sort of Hollywood version of a lawyer, I guess, that sort of kind of initially kind of lit that fire for me as in, hey, maybe this is something I'd be interested in. So,
Right.
do you recall anything like that that sort of, led you down that path?
Well, the funny thing is, when I got out of high school, I went to college right there in my hometown at the University of Alabama for a year,
Mm,
and mine was not a typical college experience. I wasn't a member of a fraternity, and uh, I lived right there in my hometown. I went to class in the mornings, and then I painted billboards in the afternoon,
mm,
and and I ran across recently the receipt from when I went to university and got my schedule for the fall semester of 1972. I ran across the receipt for the tuition. It was $255 for
wow,
the first semester. I know,
that's
isn't that
amazing.
crazy?
That's
Yeah.
crazy. That's
So so
awesome. Yeah.
so I can remember actually saying to some people that I worked with at the billboard company that they'd say, "What are you interested in?" I'd say, "I'd love to be a lawyer one day," but there was no mentor, no path that was told to me with respect to how to do that. So
Hmm.
as far as I knew, I was just cruising through college at that point and would see what would later happen. I knew that during the homecoming parades at the University of Alabama down University Boulevard, the law school students always rented a semi truck flatbed dressed up in tuxedos, and they
Hmm.
were all just totally wasted. And they would go, that was their float in the
Uh-huh.
parade of them
That's
being in
awesome.
tuxedos, totally wasted. And practically every one of them were guys. I mean,
Mhm.
the number of women when I was growing up in the 60s that were in law school was just very, very small. Now it's over
Yeah.
half.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, if that doesn't want to make you practice law, I mean, you get to go ride on a float, get wasted while you're in a parade. I mean, heck, why not?
yeah. Well,
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 and I would say, oh, go ahead.
I, I went a year at Alabama and just realized that I didn't want to put that financial pressure on my parents, and I was tired of working in the afternoons and not enjoying a college experience. So I joined the Air Force after my first year at Alabama
Hmm.
and ended up going to language school to become a translator for the Air
Hmm.
Force out in California. And After I was finished with the Air Force, I was in for 3 years. After I got out of the Air Force, I went back to college on the GI Bill.
Mm,
So that made things a lot easier.
yeah.
It wasn't a ton of money, but you could take care of state tuition, particularly in Texas, where I got out of the Air Force. We just stuck around. My wife and I'd gotten married while I was in the Air Force to my high school sweetheart,
Hmm.
and you could in Texas the tuition. I just said that Alabama's first year tuition in 1972 was 255. I went to law school at Texas Tech.
Hmm.
Law school each semester there was $190. So I went all the way through law school with tuition of less than $1,300.
Wow.
And several years ago, my oldest daughter graduated from Pepperdine Law School, and I think her total tab was,
Oh, yeah.
$150,000 or something.
I could imagine. Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. I mean, you think about yeah, the inflation of college tuition, law school tuition, like hardly anybody graduates from law school anymore without some level of student debt.
Yeah,
Um, so that's interesting. And
I
so,
I
oh,
didn't even know you could borrow money to go to school until like my third year of law school, when
mhm,
somebody said, "Why are you working and going to law school at the same time?" Because I was a waiter at a restaurant there in town and made good money, and 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 also I was working as a clerk part time, a law clerk for a lawyer there in town, and he got me interested in investing in some oil wells that he was representing clients on. So by the time I finished law school, I I didn't owe any money to anybody, and had actually made enough money, um, between my wife and me. We had made enough money in our jobs, plus the oil interest, that on the day of graduation, I drove my own red Mercedes convertible to graduation from law school. so
wow.
so it
What?
was pretty interesting.
That's
Uh,
awesome.
yeah, it's pretty interesting. I wasn't the world's greatest law student because of working so much, but
Uh-huh.
got out with no debt. Had 5 jobs that I could have taken when I got out of law school. So it all worked out well.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, are you still invested in those oil wells?
I did. I prosecuted for a year in West Texas, and
Mhm.
then when we moved to Dallas, for me to take a job in Dallas in June of '83, oil went from like a gazillion dollars a barrel down to nothing. It was
Mm,
total wipeout. So
yeah.
at that point, all of our interest went away because they capped the wells.
Oh, interesting.
So
Wow. Well, you're at the right place at the right time, at least for that period of time. So that's
yeah, true,
congratulations on that. That's
true,
awesome.
true.
Um, well, so as you're going through law school, then you said you ended up having 5 different offers. At that point, like, you're navigating through Texas Tech. Do you know what you want to do? I mean, when I was graduating, it was kind of during my third year of law school, I sort of thought I wanted to be a corporate lawyer. Did you have an idea at that time that you wanted to be a trial attorney, or what were you thinking at that point?
To me, to me, going to law school was all about the aesthetics of being a lawyer, the courtroom, the atmosphere, the juries, the judges, and all of that. I plus I'm ADD, so the idea of having an office practice of any kind would not have worked out for me well at all. So
Mhm.
I needed to have to go to hearings in court and this that, and the other. Had
Yeah.
to.
Did you find that you had a natural like ability to speak in front of others, like a charisma? Like, some people I think gravitate to that, and some people like for me, it doesn't. It's not. it doesn't come naturally. I'm more of a desk, document type of guy. So being here in front of the camera is sort of, getting me out of my comfort zone a little bit. Did you kind of have that from an early age where you were always comfortable sort of speaking in front of others?
I don't ever remember being afraid or having any type of anxiety about it.
Hmm.
So the first jury trial I ever handled when I got out of law school, um, they told me to go over to a certain court. So I went to that court. They told me that one of the other assistant DAs would be over in a little while, and that he and I would strike the jury and try the case. It was a criminal case, obviously,
Hmm.
and he never showed up. So I struck the jury and tried the case. It lasted a day, and I won. And so I was 1-0. So
Right out of the
and
chute, you're 1-0.
right,
You picked the jury. You did everything.
I got back to the office and said, "Where did you go?" And he was like, "Oh, I got busy doing something else, forgot all about it."
No way.
Well, yeah. So from then on, they just let me loose on trying
Yeah.
these smaller criminal cases.
Hmm.
And in the first year out of law school, I tried like 40 cases. I mean, it was
Wow.
crazy. Yeah, most of them were relatively short because they were there was very little discovery, if any,
Hmm.
and you had investigators putting everything together. And a lot of the DAs didn't want to try certain cases because they had like been over indicted as one thing, and
Hmm.
they're looking at the facts going, there's no way this is going to blemish my record.
Hmm.
Does anybody want to try this? And I would volunteer.
Yeah.
So I just got a ton of trial experience that first year because I would just try anything that came down the road.
That's amazing. Was someone teaching you? Were you watching other people? Did it just kind of come naturally to you? How did you develop that skill?
The I had I had a third year practice license and had been in a trial with the lawyer that I was clerking for, and got a familiarity with it right then. And then um, I worked for a district attorney that was truly an outstanding trial lawyer, just no fear, precision, smart. He had all the capabilities of being a great trial lawyer, and he put them to use. So
Hmm.
watching him, he would bring me into a case with him, and as a matter of fact, I got the job offer from him after I had helped try the case with the third year practice license.
Hmm.
Plus, I had an interest in politics at the time.
Hmm.
That he was an ambitious politician, and I thought that he might run for attorney general. So I took that job rather than one of the civil jobs that I had been offered,
Hmm.
and did that for a year, and then started getting burned out on politics, and decided that, okay, now I'm a lawyer, let's make some money with it. So
Hmm.
uh,
So at
I
that
moved,
point, you switch over
moved
to
to
private
private.
practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. What?
Actually, I tried getting out of trial law for a year when I moved from Lubbock, Texas to Dallas, Texas. I was paid. There was a law firm back then called Jenkins Gilchrist, and Jenkins and Gilchrist was it's a great firm in Dallas, represented the Cowboys and all kinds of banks and everything. A bank had hired, my wife worked for a bank in West Texas that also had a branch in Dallas. They hired me to do real estate documents. Well, I was completely not cut out for that. But it was cheaper for them to pay me to be overseen by one of the partners at Jenkins and Gilchrist than to pay Jenkins and Gilchrist directly for all this legal work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did for a year, and it just wasn't my bag.
Yeah.
And my wife and I, whenever we got pregnant with our first child, we'd been married about 9 or 10 years at that point. When we got pregnant with our first child, when she got pregnant with our first child, heard a female comedian the other day say, "Don't say we. That you're not the one waking up in the middle of the night throwing up, and you're not the one that's going to have a watermelon-sized person come out of you, and all. So don't say we were pregnant." So
Good advice. Yeah.
when my wife was pregnant with our first child, we just went through this period where we decided that what we had kind of the I guess you would call the fruits of labor that we had gotten in Dallas and Lubbock and Dallas, where and the oil field, where you could drive nice cars and get a nice house and that kind of thing, didn't mean as much as we thought it was going to at that stage in our life. So when she got pregnant with our first child, we decided to move back to Alabama. One of the reasons being, when I decided to get back into trial law, the firms I was interviewing with said, yeah, for the first few years, you'll have 2 weeks vacation, and it's going to be hard work, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. So between the traffic in Dallas and the possibility of having 2 weeks vacation, each of which, because of closeness to our families, we would probably spend in Alabama, we decided we would never see the beach again. We would never have a vacation again. Yeah. Let's just simplify life, move back to Alabama, and slow down a little. Yep. So that's what we did in 1983. Wow. And as luck would have it, we were able to sell our house before June of '83. And June of '83 is pretty much when the lights went out.
Yeah, that's the oil crash and the whole, yeah. And that's interesting too. I mean, you kind of had, you're young in your career, and instead of chasing and being ambitious enough to sort of like try to, or I guess intelligent enough at that point in time to not chase the money, but actually like think about your lifestyle and how you'd want to live. I mean, I think that becomes that you hear a lot more about that today. Mm-hmm. But that seems like that would have been more unusual back at that point in time, to not just sort of go with the highest offer. And
I watched some of my friends in New York and Los Angeles who are with large firms, and it is a pretty big commitment to lock into that lifestyle.
Yeah, it definitely is. So you moved back to Alabama. Did you open your own shop, or what was the plan there in Alabama? Did you have an offer with a firm there?
There was a lawyer. I met with a number of lawyers in Tuscaloosa, and since I wasn't licensed to practice yet, very few of them were interested. But one of them took a liking to me and said, "Well, if you move back, you take the bar, then bingo, let's practice some law together." So, and he was truly one of the most interesting people I've ever met. He had worked under Walter Flowers, who used to be a congressman from there in Tuscaloosa, and then Richard Shelby, who later became U.S. Senator from Alabama. And he was just a very interesting, very bright guy named David Ellis. And so we hit it off pretty good. So Dottie and I packed up, we moved back. A month later, I go to take the bar, and when I go to sign in and everything, somebody says, "Yeah, here you go, blah, blah, blah." And then they noticed that I had moved from Texas, that I was already licensed in Texas. And they said, wait. They said, so you were living in Texas when you applied to take the Alabama bar? And I said, yeah. And they
Mhm.
said, oh, well, you had to apply 30 days. You had to apply an additional 30 days out
Oh
than
yeah.
what you did. So bingo, I couldn't take the bar for 6 more months.
So
So
you showed up that day and they turned you away?
they turned me away because I didn't sign up early enough because I was out of state.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I went back and I told David this, and he happened to own a little title company. So I bought into the title company with the oil money,
Mhm.
and that's what I did for 6 months, waiting to take the bar and get licensed in Alabama. So, and our
Wow.
biggest competition was U.S. Senator Richard Shelby's title company there in Tuscaloosa. So uh, that was very interesting. But
Mhm.
anyway, and then
So
and then and then started practicing law with David. A defense firm there in town offered me a job.
mhm.
Had a young baby, and the volatility of plaintiff's law was difficult for a young lawyer. So I
Mhm.
took a steady job as a defense lawyer, and then later on, a couple of years later, was offered a job in Birmingham, and that's where I spent the rest of my career.
Was that Baker Donaldson? Is that
It wasn't Baker Donaldson. I
no?
went with a firm called Clark and Scott, which was an
Okay.
insurance defense firm. And I
Okay.
practiced there for a number of years before leaving there and going to Berkowitz, Lefkowitz, Isom, and Kushner, which was the predecessor firm before Baker Donaldson bought them
Got it.
out. Yeah.
And so for the majority of your career was trial law. I mean, was that kind of your expertise? Is that what did you
Totally.
typically practice in?
Totally. Everything. I,
Yeah.
I did a lot of product liability, did did some car crashes, did some fraud cases. Um, in, any anything that came through the door through an insurance company, then that's what we tried. And
Hmm.
then when I went with Berkowitz Lefkowitz, it was a little bit higher end law that dealt mainly with businesses because they were a big business firm.
Real quick, I want to recognize our sponsor, Array. Array handles all of the details of litigation so that you can focus on winning your case. They take care of forensic collection, e-discovery, managed review, record retrieval, court reporting, legal staffing and recruiting, trial support, you name it. I'm the general counsel at Array, so I may be a little bit biased, but I was also a client before I started working there too. I've used them on various matters, and they've always delivered. If you're involved in a lawsuit, make Array your first call, and they'll help you get organized right from the beginning. You can reach out to me or visit trustarray.com. Now, back to the pod. I mean, coming from that beginning where you literally just got thrown to the wolves and figured it out on your own to, towards the end of your, trial career, I guess, like how did you see that evolution of the practice of trial law? I mean, jury selection now has jury experts. You weren't using jury experts when you first started. I mean, how had your practice sort of changed and evolved over those years?
Well, my viewpoint on law changed a lot during that time period.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look historically at trial law back in the 40s and 50s, 30s, just way back whenever,
Mm-hmm.
somebody filed a lawsuit, somebody filed an answer, in a handful of months you were in court trying the case.
Mm-hmm.
Well, beginning in this probably this late 60s, early 70s, people started doing a lot more pretrial discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And the pretrial discovery changed what was going to trial and the number of cases going to trial. And eventually, we've gotten to the point where pretrial is 90% of the practice of law for a
Yep.
trial lawyer,
Yep.
if not more, probably 95%.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and it seems like such a specialty. I mean, I'm not a trial lawyer. I'm not a a litigator by background, but it seems almost like such a specialty. Like a trial lawyer is such a like we had a class action securities lawsuit at a company where I was first the general counsel, and we ended up hiring Wilson Sonsini to work on it. And the question was, who's going to handle his trial? Well, the attorney, the partner that worked on it at Wilson was like, listen, if this thing goes to trial, like 0.1% of these cases go to trial. I'm not a trial. If this goes to trial, one of my partners will handle that.
Mm-hmm.
But the case was dismissed very early. But to your point, I mean, a lot of the attorneys that I know that handle cases that I've worked on, for the companies I've been with, they're not the same people that would handle the trial if it went to that point.
Right. Right.
Uh, is that, I would assume earlier in your career, you were handling everything from soup to nuts, file the
Totally.
case. Yeah.
And appeals. And appeals.
Oh, and
Yeah.
appeals too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when I went with the bigger firm, when I went with Berkowitz Lefkowitz, you had an appellate specialist that handled all appeals. You
Mm-hmm.
had associates that would handle a lot of the motion practice
Mm-hmm.
and that type of thing. So so it freed you up to do nothing but depositions and trial work. And quite frankly, the number of trials just dwindled over the years.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember one year when I was doing insurance defense work, and not all of it was insurance defense. Like we represented Pfizer and some drug companies directly, Park Davis. There was one year that I tried 12 different lawsuits. There was another year where I tried one case out in Orange, Texas. There were 15 lawyers on the defense side.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably didn't say two words during the whole trial, but it was 12 weeks. Spent
Yeah.
12 weeks going back and forth to Orange, Texas. So it's it's just a different animal at that point.
Mm-hmm.
At this time, so many of the judges, particularly on the federal side, have to commit so much of their time to criminal cases that you might be 3 years getting to trial. Heck, I remember one time when I was doing insurance defense work, I had a case that was 8 or 9 years old from the point that the event happened. The case was 8 or 9 years old when we tried it.
Wow.
Two or three of the witnesses were dead.
What?
I mean, it was just not.
Wow.
It was an arson case, but it was
Crazy.
just, I know.
Yeah.
And then I eventually at Berkowitz Lefkowitz and then Baker Donaldson evolved into a really heavy construction practice,
Mm-hmm.
and that has so much arbitration in it that that I probably only tried one case a year the last few years that I was practicing law full
Mm-hmm.
time, back in 2007, because things would arbitrate,
Yeah.
which which if you're a trial lawyer and you do arbitrations, it's to tough to arbitrate without thinking in terms of admissible evidence and rules of evidence and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go back to do a trial, you're so used to getting someone's testimony with full of hearsay that it kind of messes you up to begin with. So it's difficult. What I'm saying is difficult to hop back and forth. It'd be like playing pickleball and tennis.
Yeah.
I mean,
Two different
I mean,
games.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, do you feel like that sort of is becoming a lost art, like the art of trial practice. Do you think there's fewer accomplished trial attorneys today than there were back in the day?
I think there are fewer characters.
Hmm.
I think there were. I think so much of law in the courtroom from early on until the last decade, maybe 2 decades, had characters. You had local lawyers that were just characters that, not like the Matlock
Right.
series.
Yeah.
He was a
Yeah.
character. I've known lawyers just like that. As a matter of fact, I knew Bobby Lee Cook. Bobby was one of our fellows,
Huh.
and
Yeah.
and and went up and spent time with Bobby at his home in North Georgia. But
Hmm.
Bobby was the person after whom Matlock was patterned.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Bob, and he was a character.
Hmm.
And you just had these characters back then. And I think judges today aren't willing to put up with as many strong-willed, um,
Personalities.
Rambo type lawyers
Yeah.
in the court. I
Yeah.
mean, some lawyers back in that day, and I've been against them, just take over a courtroom. They just take it
Hmm.
over,
Yeah.
and lawyers and judges this day and time just, I don't think, are that open to
Yeah.
it. Now, I think there are fewer characters in the courtroom today, but as long as we have rules of evidence, there are going to be trial lawyers that are able to try cases.
Hmm.
They're going to be trial lawyers that are good at jury selection, and trial lawyers that are good at cross-examination and arguing directly to the jury. There are always going to be those people because they have a rule book to go by, and they have a case that they're passionate about.
Hmm.
And if you're passionate about the case and you argue it within the rules, you're going to be able to try cases. As
Hmm.
far as the finesse of reading a jury, that is certainly an art that a lot of lawyers have had in the past that may not be something passable down to
Yeah.
generations hereafter.
Yeah.
But but reading a jury, knowing how to read people,
Hmm.
that is so much of law. I mean, Tom Mesereau, one of our fellows, he's our only two-time president. Tom, who tried the Michael Jackson case, jury specialists were going, "Ah, oh, he's picking the wrong jury. He's picking the wrong jury. We'll pick the right jury,"
Yeah.
because he had a feel for it. He had a
Right.
real feel for who needed to be on that jury.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and that is an art that that might be getting into a gray area at this point.
I mean, it's some of the conversations that I have as I'm getting, up in years in my career is some of it, the advantage of being in the office. Now we have a work from home culture and Zoom calls, and so we don't, kind of the premise of the attorney lounge is we used to have an attorney lounge where I started, and you could talk to more experienced attorneys about anything and learn from them, and kind of the you know the hallway conversations really helped. And now we have a day and age where a lot of kids are on their social media, accounts. They're on their devices. The ability to interact with other people, to look someone in the eye, to read them, to sort of understand their personality. That those, maybe it's just because I'm getting a little older in my career, but I feel like kids that have the ability to interact with other people face to face, social skills, may be dwindling a little bit. And I could see
Oh,
that translating into the law as well in terms of trial practice.
yeah, there's no doubt about that. No doubt. I gave a presentation last year on the millennial juror, and how
Mm-hmm.
differently millennials think compared to previous generations.
Mm-hmm.
Just if you just plucked a 1950s lawyer that was a great trial lawyer who tried a gazillion cases, and you stuck them in a courtroom today with millennial jurors in front of them, they would not know that they were on planet Earth. I mean, they wouldn't recognize
Yeah. Two
it.
different,
That's
yeah, like men are from Mars and women are from Venus. It's just
yeah,
two different worlds.
yeah, yeah.
Can you
So
be a great trial lawyer, like like an older, experienced trial lawyer, and still be successful? I mean, I think there's a lot of those older sort of trial attorneys that understand human psychology, that have that personality that can relate to people, that I think kind of translates generate, or can you know be you can be impactful to multiple generations just because of your personality and your way with people. Um, do you feel like that's the case, or do you think that no,
oh
like
no, I think the really good trial lawyers have adapted to the new jurors.
hmm
They have studied them. They know what they're thinking. They know what their triggers are. That they've studied them because they've had to, and
hmm
figure out. I mean, this day and time, you could have a millennial on the juror and a boomer on the jury,
yep,
a millennial on the jury, a boomer on the jury, that may get in the jury room and have totally different opinions as to what was said, what the evidence was,
yeah,
and 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 the differences among jurors is something that really good trial lawyers who have studied this are wading through right now.
hmm
But to appeal to that millennial and also the boomer with the presentation of whatever your evidence is, that's a tough row to hoe. And the really good trial lawyers that are getting good verdicts at this time are the ones that have figured it out.
yeah, yeah, and I think that I'm just so impressed with that skill. And I wish I could remember his name. There was an attorney that spoke at the Harvard Club this past fall. He was our last speaker. You might remember his name. Older gentleman, has a law firm in Texas, plaintiff's law firm. But he walked in and commanded the room, and you could tell he was,
You
why he
talking
was
about
so successful.
Jim? You talking about Jim?
What's his
White
last
hair?
name? Yeah,
God, what is Jim's last name? He's going to shoot me for not remembering his last name. Yeah,
I'll look it up.
he was a character.
But I mean, fantastic presence. He's probably in his
No, no,
80s.
no, 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 no. Howard Nations.
Howard Nations. Thank you. That's who I'm
Howard.
thinking.
I forgot Howard spoke last. I was thinking it was Jim from Austin that spoke last, but it was Howard Nations. Yeah, Howard's probably in his 80s. He used to try a ton of cases. He probably doesn't try that many anymore, obviously.
Mhm.
Yeah, Howard commanded the room because he was like listening to the great sage of law.
Yeah, and he just had a way of, like, I really liked his presentation because it was just on human behavior, psychology, what motivates people, how you keep their interest. Those things, I think, those things play well, regardless of who you are, regardless of what your age. And someone like him, you could see why he'd been so successful, and
Mm-hmm.
that was a fascinating presentation. And I think, I just wonder how that's going to continue to develop as, the years go on and generations of new trial lawyers come, and the difference in practice. And maybe it's no different than, from a trial attorney in the 1920s to a trial attorney in the 1950s. I don't know, but it just feels like the rapid acceleration in terms of social media, the way that we interact with each other, it just seems so much different, I guess,
It is
just in the
different.
last 20 years. Yeah.
It is different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm going to transition then a little bit to LCA. Speaking of trial attorneys, so at what point in your career then did you have this idea for LCA, and maybe a little background on why you founded it and how this came to you?
When I was at Baker Donaldson, one of my female partners came by my office one day and asked me if I would write a letter in support of her getting into one of the elite societies. And I told her I certainly would. And I did. And some time went by. And I asked her, I said, did you have any luck getting into the group you wanted? And
Hmm.
she said I couldn't darken the door.
Hmm.
Well, she was a good trial lawyer. She had a different lifestyle than a lot of people, but just a really good trial lawyer. She's one of
Hmm.
our fellows. She's spoken a number of times at our events.
Hmm.
But I got to thinking about the fact that she wasn't she wasn't successful in getting in one of the other elite societies. And I went to their website and just to see who was in the society from Alabama. And there were at that time 70 lawyers, 67 white guys,
Hmm.
2 African American guys, and 1 female, and she was a judge.
Hmm.
So literally in the whole state of Alabama, there was not a practicing female lawyer in this particular society.
Hmm.
So my wife and I were sitting around having a glass of wine at the pool one night, and I started telling her about that. And we have 3 daughters, we have no sons, 3 daughters. And we've always wanted them to have an opportunity to do whatever they wanted in life and to get a fair shake and that type of thing.
Hmm.
And she said, well, why don't you do something about that? And I was like, well, what could we do? And she said, well, why don't you start a new organization that recognizes women and minorities, at least in the percentage that they're represented in the bar.
Yep.
And that was an idea around 2004 or 5, somewhere right in there. So my wife, we had a playroom on the 3rd floor of our house. And in back of the playroom, there was a little home office area. So
Hmm.
my wife took that challenge. I challenged her to get it rolling. She took that challenge, hired a part-time employee that had been a sorority sister of my oldest daughter and middle daughter. And they put together a bunch of research on lawyers that were of the caliber that we would have liked to have seen in this particular society, and were diverse.
Hmm.
So in October of 2006, we started out as the American Academy of Trial Counsel.
Hmm.
So in 2006, October of 2006, we sent out the first few hundred invitations. And the response was, I didn't know if anybody would join.
Yeah.
And the response was incredible.
Wow. That's
People were
great.
very interested in being part of something with a diversity
Yeah.
mission.
Hmm.
So it floated along for several months. We had to make the part-time employee full-time.
Hmm.
Started looking for office space. We had a conference in New York
Hmm.
that was well attended, and incredible lawyers came.
Hmm.
The a lot of the lawyers that we were getting were already in other societies, and and some of the lawyers that we were inviting who weren't in other societies were asking if they could nominate lawyers to be in the LCA,
Mm-hmm.
or at that time the AATC, and we were going, sure. Well, after several months, there a one of the other societies with a similar name to the American Academy of Trial Counsel
Uh-huh.
got contacted by someone we had invited.
Mm-hmm.
That is, we sent an invitation to a minority lawyer in California who lost our invitation.
Mm.
He called this other group. So then, under antitrust laws, I mean, under intellectual property laws, what have
Yeah.
you got? Actual confusion. You got actual confusion.
Uh-huh.
So they said, we want you to, and they looked at our numbers, and they were, our numbers were growing. They said, we want you to change your name. Well, we had looked at a variety of names to begin with, and that we agreed on Litigation Counsel of America, that we would change our name to that, and it just
Off,
kept going. It
off to
kept
the
growing.
races you went.
Yeah.
So were you practicing actively at the time that you started LCA?
Yes. I
And
was
then
practicing, and my wife was getting it rolling.
yeah.
And the fall of 2007, my firm said, listen, we know you're doing this other thing. We know you're doing the LCA.
Mm-hmm.
You need to either practice law full time or do that, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't do both. It's taking up too much of your time. And on a whim, at our second conference, which was in Scottsdale, Arizona, one of my several of my Baker Donaldson partners were there
Mm-hmm.
that I had invited. On a whim, I decided that I would do the LCA full time.
Wow.
So it all worked out.
Yeah.
The yeah, it's I wanted to do something at that point in my life that was positive in nature. Generally speaking, when you're a trial lawyer, you're either representing a person who thinks they have been wrongfully accused, so they're upset, they're not happy,
Mm-hmm.
or you're representing someone who has been injured and is doing the suing, they're
Mm-hmm.
not happy.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So there's in trial law, there's just naturally a lot of negativism on the part of your clients.
Right. Yep.
So this was to recognize lawyers for good work done,
Mm-hmm.
and to help them have an outlet for speaking, for writing, for any variety of practice building opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And we had talked to a couple of legal marketing experts on how to build value into the LCA.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it. It just kind of took off in 2007, and we changed the format to where we had a maximum number of 3,500 fellows. We've been at that for years and years.
Mm-hmm.
We have to replenish about 10% of our people a year because of retirement or death or people taking judgeships, or
Yeah.
and so some people become law professors, but those people become fellows emeritus
Right.
A lot of people go in-house, quite frankly, but
Hmm.
but so our 3,500 is based upon practicing lawyers
Hmm.
who aren't in judgeships or in-house counsel or anything of that nature.
Yep.
So, and we have a ton of judges in the LCA. We have law professors of great note, and
Yep. Yep.
it's a great group.
It's a wonderful organization. I've gotten familiar with it over the last year, and I know, several attorneys that I look up to here in the Valley. I know like Bill Maladon is a member. Some friends that I practice with are members. I've met some amazing members. You know, what uh, what what do you think sort of captivated? Like you've seen this tremendous growth. Everybody sort of gravitated to it. It is highly diverse. It's a great group of people. Like, what do you think it led to all of that? What do you think it is attractive about LCA that kind of caught lightning in a bottle and captured people at that time?
I think it's probably the difference in going to a party at the country club or going to a party at an Irish bar. I
Mhm.
mean, I mean, I mean, there's a we have never been stoic.
Mhm.
We have never been aloof. We've always tried to be inclusive in who we select. We've there's a certain fun factor, I think, about being in the LCA, and
Absolutely. Yeah.
and the places that we've taken the group over the years have been outstanding.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It is an amazing group, and then the presentations that I've heard just in the short, time I've been going to the meetings are unbelievable. I hate to single any, Howard Nations, like we talked about. Howard Nations was an amazing presenter. One of the presenters was the trial attorney that represented Kevin Spacey. That was an amazing presentation.
mhm.
I remember hearing one on with an attorney from Brian Cave who talked about mediation techniques. It just the yeah, the settings where the meetings occur are great, but the presentations and the camaraderie and the you know the people that are there are just very genuine. They're
Right.
very interested in helping one another. It's a very collegial group. It's just a
We,
wonderful
we've always
organization.
we've always told people to leave their egos at the door, because you're no longer the superstar in the room. You're in a room full of superstars.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Well, it's amazing, and kudos to your wife for twisting your arm and telling you to do it, and then for her to get it launched and turn it into the organization that it is.
mhm.
What an amazing legacy that you've created for yourself using your practice and everything that you've done, and sort of building towards this. Towards the end of your career to sort of put something like this together, I think is just an amazing accomplishment. So
Been fun. It's been so much fun.
yeah, what
So we're in our 10th year.
it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and going strong. I mean, I think, the group that's there, I think I see, I've been, I think 3 meetings now, and you see some similar faces, and, it just seems to be getting even bigger and stronger, as you go along. What I was going to finish up sort of like as we talk about, kind of, career trial lawyers and things. What advice do you have for young attorneys that are interested in being a trial attorney? What sorts of things can they do to position themselves for success as a trial lawyer today?
Volunteer to do anything related to a trial. If they know a trial, if somebody in their firm is going to trial, whether you're just carrying the briefcase, do it. Get in the courtroom, see what it's all about, see how the people act. The decorum in a courtroom is so different among lawyers, and realizing first they have to realize that not all cases are going to go as planned. That, I mean, you can work on one aspect of a case night and day for weeks, and then get into court, and the judge, for whatever reason, says, "Yeah, it's not coming in."
Yeah.
And somebody asked me not too long ago, what makes a great trial lawyer? I think it's adaptability under pressure.
Yeah.
Great trial lawyers can think on their feet and turn on a dime and get past a moment that could otherwise kill their case. So if
Yeah.
you can adapt under pressure, then you're going to be good in court. But you have to be comfortable in that setting, and the only way to get comfortable is to go. Even if they needed to work on something else, go sit in court and do it. Go sit in court and watch what goes on.
Yeah.
They're just, the familiarity aspect is what is missing about today's trial lawyers, or lawyers that want to be trial lawyers, is the familiarity with that setting, with the judges. I mean, the differences between judges is unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, so and there's a lot of home cooking still going on in
sure. Yeah.
And until you get raked over the coals by a judge who is not particularly in favor of your side of the case, you haven't lived as a trial lawyer.
Yeah, and it does seem like that experience, there's nothing that can substitute for that experience. You can read about it, you can, learn as much as you want, but the experience of actually being in the courtroom, I can't imagine any other better way to do it. And like you said, just so many times, I think in so many different areas, the willingness to volunteer your time, for free to just learn, and spend that time actually gaining that experience, I think is so valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're right too. Like we were talking, I think at the Harbor Club, one of the last meetings, we were talking about the difference between judges in North Carolina and the way the trials happen in North Carolina. I mean, the difference between that and what happens in New York, or jury selection, and so spending time in your jurisdiction where you're going to be practicing, learning that venue, because it does change from from state to state, court to court, judge to judge. So,
absolutely. Yeah. We're in the process of trying to put together a simplified how-to book for lawyers that need to go to another jurisdiction to try case. One of our lawyers, Kevin Mayer, out in California, Kevin wrote the prototype, and I need to send it out to a number of people and say, hey, will you write the same thing for your state? And what he did was simply say, here's how it works in California in a civil case. You show up and this happens and this happens, and you have two different tracks of cases, and according to which track you're on, that determines what goes on. And he just follows it through, soup to nuts, in 5 or 6 pages, and bingo, you have an overall idea of how it works in California.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And I've had a lot of lawyers say, yeah, I didn't listen. I didn't attend that particular speaker talking about Vordar or Wadir, ever how you want to say it, because my state, we don't get to have that. We don't have that. Judge chooses the jurors. So just just figuring out what the heck goes on from state to state is incredible.
Yeah. It's amazing to me. I remember hearing people talk about that, not being a litigator, I would have never thought that the jury would just, or, the judge would just pick it in certain jurisdictions. That difference, from state to state, court to court, something I didn't even realize.
Oh yeah. And,
But
and selecting a jury in federal court as compared to state court where you can't backtrack on who you're striking.
yeah. Yeah. Well, what have we not covered? What's next? What's next for LCA? Where's it going from here?
Savannah. We're going to Savannah.
Yeah.
And then we're going to Jackson Hole. And then we're back in New York in December.
And bring your tux to Jackson Hole, right?
Please. No tux in Savannah, but definitely Jackson Hole.
I'll bring the things that I got from Banff to Jackson Hole for sure.
There you go. There you go.
Well, Steve, thank you so much. I think we're up against the time here for.
I've enjoyed it greatly. This has been a lot of fun.
Me too. I really appreciate you giving us your background and the history of the LCA. It's such a wonderful organization. Again, congratulations to you and your wife and what you've built. It's an amazing legacy, and kudos to all of you. So check out LCA, Litigation Counsel of America, if you're interested in learning more. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. Thank you to Array for sponsoring the podcast. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.